society. You barely turn on the television today, the radio, or the TV, pick up a newspaper, that there isn't something about immigration, and in particular, something about illegal immigration. And as I listen to the debate, it goes something like this: don't confuse me with the facts, it's what I believe, and nothing you say is going to change my mind. It's a highly politicized, highly emotional debate, and what I would suggest to you, little empirical evidence to support the kinds of assertions out there. I don't think that that's a sound way to make policy. I think it's incumbent upon us to understand the historical role that people of color played in transforming this society, the contemporary role that they play today, and the future role that they will have to play, given the second political process that we find ourselves in the midst of, which I refer to as the grading of America. Now, whereas the founding of America is about the role of people of color, immigrants and people of color, changing the complexion of our society, the grading of America is about the aging of our native-born population, and in particular, the aging of the non-Hispanic white population in America. Now, you might ask the question, how do you know if you're part of the grading of America? There are actually 4 ways. Number 1, if you have difficulty seeing this screen or me standing up. Number 2, if you have to go to the ladies' room or the men's room 3 times during this presentation. And number 3, if you fall asleep, you've already established your old codgers now. More seriously, I want to see a show of hands. Anybody in the room born before 1946? Those of you who were born before 1946 are the old codgers. About a show of hands of people who were born between 1946 and 1964. The majority of us, we are the soon-to-be old codgers, and we are known as the boomer generation. It was our fathers who went off to World War II, they came back home and they got busy. They got busy to the tune of producing 86 million of us. We're turning 50 to the tune of 12,000 per day and 60 to the tune of 9,000 per day. On January 1st of 2008, the first boomer, person born as a boomer in America, and it was a female, ladies, turned 62 and became eligible for what? Social Security. Now fast forward to January 1st of 2011, how old would she be? None of y'all in finance in here. How old would she be? 65 and eligible for what? Everything. Everything. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, we have this huge wave of people who have entered the labor market and are now marching toward what? It's called the silver tsunami, and it's about to hit. Now, why is that important? It's important because behind the baby boom in America, there was a baby bust. We stopped having children in sufficient numbers to replace ourselves. If you look at the data, and I will show it to you, behind the baby boom, the baby bust generation, there's only 67 million people in that cohort. Now you got 86 million people doing what? Headed toward the door. And a smaller, and I'm going to show you a shrinking pool of people behind them. Okay? So you got a slight problem. Now, I've been teaching, I've been around the block a couple times. Everybody's looking at me and saying, what are you talking about, man? We're the deepest economic recession. Ain't nobody leaving work. You're right. Lots of people are going to stay. But what you have to understand is that's not a free good. Why? Because as we all age, we acquire disabling conditions. 12 pitch ain't 12 on a computer anymore. You got the phone turned wide open and you still can't hear it. All those stairwells you used to twitch up and down, Twitter up and down, you can't do it anymore. In other words, to accommodate an aging workforce, you have to do what? You have to make accommodations in the workplace and environment. And it will not be an easy accommodation because of the kinds of changes, other changes that we find ourselves in the midst of. Now, undergirding this browning and grading thing is a whole series of other kinds of diversity issues that we must contend with at the same time. Linguistic diversity, religious diversity. But one of the big ones is this intergenerational diversity. Intergenerational, because as our workforce mature, and as we age, we're going to have a whole series of different generations with different value orientations, different attitudes, perspectives, and the like. Veterans, people born between 1922 and 1945. Those of us who are boomers, the majority of us, 1946 to 64. Gen X, 65 to 80. Gen Y, 81 to 2000. All of us in the workplace with radically different work ethics, orientation, values, and the like. Those of us who are baby boomers are kind of punch the clock kind of folk. We like to be where if you got to be there at 8 o'clock, my God, we're there at 7:59, we punch the clock, and who goes home at 5 o'clock? That's un-American to go home at 5 o'clock. Then you got the digital generation, who walks in about 9:30 in the morning and are finished by 9:45, when you boomers are picking your nose trying to do all day long, and all of a sudden they say, it's 5 o'clock, I gotta go pick my kids. And you look at them and say they got a bad work ethic. And they look at you and say, I finished what you've been trying to do 15 minutes after I got here this morning. And all of us have to exist in what? The same working. Well, I don't have time to go through all those differences. You can look at it and put this on your website. But there are a whole series of challenges associated with these intergenerational differences that we have to contend with as we move forward in the years ahead. One statistic. Today, there are about 340 people in the world who are 100 or older. By 2050, there will be 6 million people who are 100 or older. That's the kind of change. We're in an era of global aging. There's actually only one region of the world that isn't experiencing global aging, and it's sub-Saharan Africa. Every other region is experiencing global aging, and we're going to have to buckle our seatbelts to deal with what I define here as grave in America, but understand it's a global phenomenon. Let me take a step back and make the case really, really quickly for you for both brown and gray, and then shift to what it's all about. If you look at the data very carefully, what you will see is that immigration is playing a much greater role in our society today than in the past. But if you look at this graphic very carefully, what you will see is that the number of immigrants in our country from 1900 to about the mid-1960s, 1970, were pretty stable, fairly low. And the reason for that is, until the mid-1960s, we have an immigration policy in America that says if we were going to allow immigrants to come to America, it was important that they not upset the existing racial and ethnic balance of our society. So we had an express preference for people who were phenotypically similar to Anglo-Saxons. Individuals who come to America, anglicize their language, learn to speak English, and this thing called the melting pot was supposed to work. In other words, we operated on a quota system. And we said that there were certain people in the world, certain regions of the world, we shouldn't allow large numbers of people to come to America because it would be, quote unquote, difficult for them to assimilate. You go back to the 1880s, we had something called the Chinese exclusion law. And until 1962, Canada had a white-only immigration policy. So we controlled the mix of our population through policy. Now, but you begin to see something happen around mid-1960s, 1970. You see the sharp uptick in the number of immigrants in our population. That came about via an amendment to our immigration law in 1965. There's something called the Hart-Celler Act, where we eliminated the discriminatory provisions in our immigration law, opening up the doors of our country to people who heretofore have not been allowed to come to America in large numbers. This is a salient piece of policy shift and immigration change, because what we talk about in immigration law is any immigrant arriving before 1965, we refer to them as the old immigrants and the so-called invisible minorities. Why? Because they were phenotypically similar to Anglo-Saxons, so it was hard to distinguish them once they went through assimilation. Anybody arriving after 1965, we call them the new immigrants and the so-called visible minorities. Why? Because they are phenotypically different from Anglo-Saxons. Yes, they can come, anglicize their names, learn to speak English and all of that, but you will always know that they're different. Why? Because they're phenotypically different. In addition to that fundamental shift in geographic origins, the numbers changed dramatically. Prior to 1965, we only allowed about 206,000 immigrants, foreigners to enter the country on an annual basis. Since 1965, that number has grown from about 500,000 to today, somewhere in the neighborhood of about 1.1 million annually, and it says diversified. And other critical distinction, prior to 1965, illegal immigration wasn't much of a problem in America. Wasn't much of a problem for two reasons: the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. Have you ever met anybody that tried to swim either one of those bodies? It just wasn't a problem. Since 1965, though, where we have a continuous border, and that has been relatively fluid until recent, this thing called illegal immigration has assumed greater ascendancy in America. And in the numbers, we see that contributing to the growth of our immigrant population. Now, when you hear the discussion of illegal immigrants, what group is always the poster child for illegal immigration? Some person of Mexican descent surreptitiously crossing the Rio Grande, right? I want to suggest to you that it's a little bit more complicated than that. There are actually a group of immigrants in America who are called, by census definition, non-immigrants. Now, that group of immigrants called non-immigrants. These are folks who come to America on a temporary basis. Okay? They come on visas. There are at least 68 different categories of them. Tourists are the largest group, international students, foreign diplomats, people coming on H-1B visas, L, everything visa. We got a visa for every alphabet, every letter in the alphabet. Tourists are the largest group. Ladies and gentlemen, if you come on a 90-day tourist visa and you stay 91 days, what are you? No, you call a visa overstay. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 to 45% of the illegal immigrants in America, ladies and gentlemen, walk through the door with papers from the federal government. They didn't come surreptitiously anyway. What did they do? When it's time to go home, what did they say? It's that. But you know what? This group of immigrants look a lot like the people in this room. In fact, I don't know who in here is illegal. We're going to find out. They tend to be well educated. They tend to come from all over the world. And they could be sitting beside you in some of the most sensitive areas of our economy, and you not know. This is not a political statement. It's just to say, if we're going to have an honest and open discussion about illegal immigration, let's have it in terms of the reality of the situation. If you got 40 to 45 to 50% of the people walking through the door with papers, and when it's time to go home, staying, we got a much more complicated situation than just a poor immigrant who surreptitiously crosses the Rio Grande. It's a far more complicated thing. That's my 2 cents worth on that. That's free at any cost. Now, where are we? What we're talking about with the browning of America is this fundamental shift of immigrants from Europe, the periwinkle color here, to Asia and Latin America, yellow and burnt orange, and there's lots of other folks over here as other areas. Radical increases in the number of people and diversification of the pool, including legal permanent residents, including unauthorized immigrants, including refugees, parolees, and asylees, and a whole group of other folks, all contributing to the diversity of our population, and you need to understand that. Now, as a function of all of that, we're talking about a heck of a color adjustment in our population in the years ahead, what I call the brown of America. Look at it here. In 2005, 67% of the population of this country were white. We're forecasting that that's going to drop to about 47% by 2050. Black share is going to grow from 12 to 13.5%. The Hispanic share from 14 to 29%. Asians from 5 to 9%. When I talk about the browning of America, what I'm talking about is this fundamental shift in the composition of our population that is rooted in the relative growth of these two populations. Back in 1995, we forecasted that the U.S. population was going to grow and reach 300 million by 2015, and we said it wasn't going to grow very much. From 2015 to 2050, there was going to be basically stable. Anybody know when we reached 300 million people in this country? November of 2006. Now, you had the Census Bureau saying that was going to go to 2015. It occurs in 2006. Something wrong. What's going on? My grandmama had a 3rd grade education. When the government gave her a number like that, she said, Your sour flying horn meant something ain't right here. So I'm going to tell you something wasn't right 2 years after they did those projections. See, every 10 years we count everybody in the population.